So I believe Mr. Jim Rutt posted the cognicist manifesto on a Game B forum with a critique of it. In particular was the phrase I'm about to read, and the purpose of this video is in defense of this section of the manifesto. So first I'm going to read the particular passage that he did not like, and then I'm going to contextualize it literally by reading what comes next and telling the story of how it was written. So, the passage he took issue with was, and the title of this section is The Challenge with Defining Truth. Truth is largely dependent on context. There are varied definitions of it. Truth is easiest to define when it can be independently verified, as with empirical claims. But scientific truths represent a fraction of the total available truths. And like all pursuits, science is affected by the context of the individuals doing science. Truth is also contained in the uniqueness of every human life and life experiences. All truths have value in the mind of the believer. Okay. He took issue with this because he said, to my mind, it is both a wrong-headed and dangerous view of truth and epistemics. I think that's how he pronounced it. Rather than being expansive in defining truth as being whatever somebody believes, we ought to be making the opposite move. Reserving truth for claims that have a solid intersubjective agreement about interobjective verification. And even those ought to be caveated with tags like, as best we know today. Outside of the axiomatic systems like logic and math, there is no absolute truths yet, and may never be. I agree with this. This is the frustrating point. This is incredibly frustrating. Like, I agree with what he's saying. And I feel like what is written in the manifesto actually reflects this same thing. Except for the part about controlling the definition of truth. I don't think we can control the definition of anything. I think people should embrace that you do not control the definitions of words. You will sleep a lot better at night if you embrace the fact that you have no control over the definitions of words. He says, as to belief truths, we should resist those. For example, the acceptance of various metaphysical speculations as truth, whether it's Yahweh is our tribal god, and he tells us to kill them all, Book of Joshua, or whether it's racist claims that our Aryans are the Uber people and everyone ought to be their slaves. Truths as beliefs are extremely dangerous. Sure, but it just is going to happen anyways. That's just fucking currently how it is. So I almost never use the word truth for the reasons I lay out above. In the rare occasion I do, I try to remember to caveat it. The funny thing is that the same thing since I've written the manifesto, I stopped referencing truth. And as soon as I discovered the term sense making, right, I was like, oh, let's use that word in sense. But it meant the same fucking thing. I'm talking about, truth is when something like you have a feeling or sensation of truth or truthiness, like Colbert, right? And you can just replace all these references in the manifesto of truth to things that make sense to that particular person. That's what I'm talking about. I'm trying to capture what makes sense to every particular individual and find a representation of all of that best benefits the community that's sharing their views, right? And I don't want to control what anyone has to say. I don't want to control your truth. I want you to share it truthfully, but I also want you to be held accountable to yourself. If you say one thing and then 4 years later you're saying something completely different and the algorithm presents it to you, it's like, you have changed your mind. You should accept the reality that you said things. I'm sorry. And some people don't want to. And he says, in my view, not necessarily the truth. Opinion is another class of things, and that is not true. That is much more useful and much less dangerous than an expansive definition of truth. So we have differing ontologies, or whatever you call it. Like, I never know what that word means, but it's the way that we structure our representation of the world. And I'm trying to communicate to him, I don't care about the fucking word truth. It's an idea, and like a lot of what I'm saying is the exact same thing as he's saying, but it just feels like he's discrediting me and the concepts that I'm putting forward. So let's just contextualize it a little bit more by reading what comes after. It's in the challenge with defining truth, and I'll tell you the story of it afterwards. It says, right after that part about individual people's versions of truth matter and have value, What a crazy concept. It's so extremist to let people have their own personal definitions of truth. I'm sorry, I'm being a dick. Truth exists. There is a signal in the noise. Truth often exists in a cloud of uncertainty, but it tends to coalesce into singular truths. Truth itself might not be found at the present median of the bell curve of collective minds, but is where the cognicist begins their journey. A cognicist begins their examination of truth by assessing and troubling the collective vision that is presented to them in the moment. There is a means to move towards truth with confidence, if not certainty. One may never arrive at the truth, but one can know its direction. The cognicist way is to seek the truth while keeping a permanent, decentralized, historical record of our collective perceptions. This record enables a cognicist to address their own beliefs over time, as well as those of the collective. Having an accurate perception of one's own inconsistencies creates a sense of accountability. One must be accountable to themselves in their understanding of their own mind. When one examines their own thought over time, errors of cognition and dissonances in belief become more clear. Instead of ignoring the past selves, we are inclined to ignore or reject. A cognicist interrogates their history of thought and addresses their own strengths and weaknesses. A cognicist accepts uncertainty and the overwhelming probability that they themselves have been and are incorrect about some truths they hold. As cognicist, we recognize that one can never arrive at the ultimate truth, only refine our approximation and increment towards truth as honestly as we can. Because we seek the best approximation of foundational truth, we define truth with a line through the T. So it's it looks like an F, like it's half truth, half false. As a decentralized framework for seeking truth, regular truth, and speaking truths at scale, we define truth with as a token representing the collective future worldview. Truth is a tool for interrogating our collective approximations and improving them. It is a tool for examining our personal relationship to truth, for assessing truth, and assessing our personal experiences, our own individual truths. Truth is a derivative of truth itself. So in context, what is being said by this passage, and who wrote it, and why did they write it? In context, what this passage is saying, fuck, we can't even define truth together, so I'm just gonna rename it. Except for it looks the same, but it has a T, because the T looks like a $sign, so it's like a tokenization of it. Now, the truth is that I don't longer think that the truth with the T is necessarily the best name. I think maybe it's something like sense, or something like if you share to the sense chain, you share it because it makes sense, and if it made sense, you make sense. That's how you're rewarded. This is abstract. Okay, so this section, the challenge with defining truth, if I recall correctly, the large bulk of it was not written by me. It was written by a childhood friend and somebody who I would personally describe as, if not a Trump supporter, a Trump apologizer, and someone with an obsessional level of research into what he calls Russiagate, to the point of not really helping him, right? And yet I still agree with that definition of truth as being that, well, if he says it's his truth and you say it's your truth, how are you going to make somebody have a different definition? I can't really fathom a way. We live in this world where we're all trying to control and own truth, but you can't. Your own personal perceptions and definitions are only an approximation or derivative of what is, right? And this fellow, we are no longer currently talking because since 2017, I view him as having become increasingly extremist. still, I want to be connected with him, but the falling out was on the 6th, and it came down to a definition difference, which is that I was viewing what had happened as an insurrection, right? I saw all the pieces like that. This kind of fits the definition of insurrection. And he could not view me as coming independently to that conclusion. He was absolutely certain that I was coming to that because of the media, right? And that some media organization had decided to declare it an insurrection. I'm like, no, I'm just looking at what it was. When that happened, I was in the air. I had no idea what was happening. I was flying. Like, I didn't know if my country was going to exist when I landed, really. Like, I had no concept. For those hours, 6 hours or whatever, or for 6 hours, I was in the air. I had no idea what was happening, right? But there was a feeling on that flight, legitimately, before there was any media, because I never read a story about it. I just got a text from a friend saying, they're in the building. They're in the Capitol. I'm like, what? And then I got on the fucking plane. And they were like, I think there was more to it, that he said there was some violence involved and they had forcibly entered into the Capitol building during that time. And I was like, in the air, literally like, fuck, are they gonna kill the fucking people? Just the context of people choosing to break into that space at that time, the clear implication was that something really scary was happening, right? And so we had this falling out because I was posting saying, guys, I feel like this is an insurrection. I feel like this meets the definition of insurrection. And he thought that was a dangerous sort of use of the word, that I was being dangerous by calling it an insurrection, right? And so I don't want to cut this human being out of my life forever. I'm sorry. I would love more that we grew together and found some alignment in our views so that these trivialities of the past can dissolve and that we can work together towards a greater future, right? He is afraid of talking to me right now because I told him, I said, like, if you make threats against people, I would report you to somebody because I don't want you to physically hurt people. And he interpreted that as like, I'm going to turn him into the capas. I'm like, but you're not making threats of violence against people. So why is that freaking you out? And there was just so much tension at that time that like we stopped talking. But when I think of that passage, it's like that story reflects the truth in it. I'm sorry, it really, really does. I get that Jim Rutt, I get his perspective. I just don't think I can control the contents of other people's minds. I can gift them the idea of cognicism, which is a different way to think about the world in terms of like a spectrum of certainty and a way of interrelating with each other to find a common representation of, knowledge that is useful to all. And like if somebody says that they like chocolate, it's not really an opinion. In fact, it's one of the truest things that can be said. It's something that they only know. It's like nobody can say they don't like chocolate because they do like chocolate. It's almost as true as a tautology. And I don't view there being as any value in making a distinction between those. What this section of the challenge with defining truth is to highlight the fact that different people have very different definitions of truth. And if we want to come together, you have to embrace that. Don't just other people who have a different definition of what truth means. Try to find a way where you can agree on some sort of protocol to interface with each other. That's what I'm talking about with forethought and with the ideas presented in the manifesto. You can interact and engage with people that in a trustless way so that you can come to a space of trust over time. And an iterative update of both of your parameters. Okay. I've screwed myself over by having to edit a lot of stuff again. I should just stop thinking, right? I should just stop speaking, right? No. Anyways, I still enjoyed talking with Jim, even though I feel particularly attacked, and attacked in a dumb way. Like, I'm sorry, I just feel like the critique is like answered in the next thing, in the whole thing. Like, I feel like the critique is immediately answered, so it's a weird thing. I hope I get to talk to Jim again. He's not grumpy at me for being young, dumb, and full of sass, full of dickishness, full of pure pompousness. Bye. Bye.